Welcome back to the Asterian Labyrinth. Today, we're diving into something of a bit different, a theory for the supernatural universe. Well, more like a hypothesis, really. We're asking the question, why the hell did Chuck seem to hate Jack so much? I mean, it's Chuck, God himself, a literal cosmic entity with a really well-established modus operandi, a specific way of doing things, essentially. And he just tosses it all out the window when it comes to Jack and the Winchesters. This abrupt change paved the way for his much maligned shift into villain territory. So let's take a look at that, shall we? Now, to understand Chuck's hatred of Jack, one must first grasp the method in which Chuck operates. He is a creator, but more precisely, he's a narrator. His power is not simply to form matter from the void,
Creatio ex nihilo. God created the earth out of nothing, or so your Sunday school teacher would have you believe.
But to bind fate to narrative law. He builds realities the way a scribe pens scripture, deliberately, meticulously, and with the expectation that all players obey their roles.
Play your roles out there.
Even though, let's be entirely honest, he is somewhat of a crappy writer.
Crappy bar with a hack writer.
We're not going to get into that, though. Even chaos to Chuck is calculated. Lucifer's rebellion, the rise of the Leviathans, the Winchester brothers' defiance. It all served the structure. The illusion of free will was carefully curated throughout the entirety of Supernatural. But when it came to Jack, something else seemed to be going on here. Basically, he was a ripple that Chuck didn't cause, a variable he did not account for. And I imagine that the hatred started off as interest to see just how this Nephilim child would become. Across the span of all known supernatural realities, worlds upon worlds born by Chuck's hand, or rather, written by his hand.
God, Chuck, is a writer. And like all writers, he churns out draft after draft. My world? This world? Nothing but failed drafts.
Jack seemingly appears in only one universe. This would make him a singularity of truth, similar to the Shadow, Death, Amara, Chuck himself, a being not replicated, not mirrored, not echoed in any other timeline or reality. After all, he is born from a unique lineage of a celestial union between the human Kelly Klein, ordinary, regular, and Lucifer himself, the second most powerful archangel in the entirety of the supernatural universe, something which would seem inconceivable given Lucifer's immense hatred for humanity.
You, the little hairless apes. And I said, Father, I can't. I said these human beings were flawed, murderous.
But living beyond the apocalypse, there's seen major changes in Lucifer, including talking with his father, getting an apology that he's been looking for ever since he was thrown in the cage. This is what made Jack's birth possible, due to the unique circumstances in those years. Whether Lucifer knew it or not, the natural order had invisible laws that had to be obeyed. Among them, being the offspring of an angel will surpass their parents in power.
A Nephilim becomes more powerful than the angel who sired it.
Jack was not merely the child of an angel, thus setting the stage for Jack's immense power from the start. But Jack's ascension didn't stop there. When he lost most of his grace and had to use the power of his own soul to continue being effective while fighting alongside the Winchesters, he would defeat and utterly destroy Apocalypse Michael, a stronger, colder, more war-hardened version of the Michael we know, who was stated to be like Genghis Khan, or the god of Apocalypse World. Jack consumed his grace and became something more. It would not surprise me if Jack had begun to rise to levels of power that was approaching the four previously established singularities. And that is where interest would start to change into fear. After all, the guy basically watches over everything, so he knew what this meant for Jack to become so powerful. In every prior crisis, Chuck relied on his narrative skills and ability to manipulate in order to achieve his goals in the end, when power was not enough. As a result, Amar, his sister and equal, could be sealed. Death had terms and could be contained, even having the fates working for him and could be steered by his hand. But Jack changed the script. When one of the books of death told that Dean Winchester must seal himself inside of a coffin to contain Apocalypse Michael forever, Jack subverted it. He absorbed Apocalypse Michael, erasing the need for the sacrifice, and in doing so violated a fate that not even Chuck had authored, one that he couldn't have even authored. because those books write themselves based on the choices of the individuals that they're based on. Chuck can't even read them, not without Death's permission, and he sure as hell cannot change them. But Jack broke the story of Apocalypse Michael for a new ending. Something had to be done. Now, faced with this living threat, Chuck had to turn to the old tools of the gods whenever they lose control. Basically, a weapon designed as a test. A gun named the Equalizer. Now, do not get me wrong. This is not an ordinary gun. It does not kill by piercing flesh, but by sending out a wave of multidimensional energy across a perfectly balanced quantum link between the shooter and the target. In essence, a weapon that allows even a lower, far weaker being to wound and kill higher ones. This had the effect of even making primordial entities like Chuck and Amara be capable of dying like regular humans.
Hey, Chuck!
Hence the name. But ironically, there was another name that was made into a joke, written off as basically just Chuck being bad at names, but one that had far greater implications that the Winchesters or even Castiel didn't even attempt to take into consideration. Especially Castiel, he should have known there was something wrong when he heard this name. The Hammurabi.
Thinking of calling it the Equalizer. Or the Hammurabi.
Hammurabi was a king of old Babylon. He was famed for his code, which was one of the earliest legal codes in the world, being the establishment of the first laws. This secondary name hinted to the idea that Chuck was trying to maintain control over his creation, a poetic solution if one were still committed to narrative beauty. But Chuck gave it to the Winchesters, despite knowing full well what they are, what they believe in, who they protect, family. And that's the truth. Jack had become family to them. Yet he wanted them to kill Jack, attempting to wrestle control to break free will to do his bidding. But when they refused, Chuck abandoned poetry and ended it with a single snap of his fingers. Just like that.
Have it your way.
But this leads to an interesting question. Why kill Jack? Throughout the eons, Chuck has created numerous threats that could easily bring the world to its knees. And in every instance, Chuck's solution was always the same: containment. He locked away Lucifer in the cage, bound Amara within the Mark of Cain, tossing the Leviathans into purgatory, and even confined death beneath the earth in a powerful seal. Chuck's philosophy was clear. No matter how dangerous, how insidious or powerful an entity might be, there was always a way to control it, to contain it within the lines of the story. The only other deviation would be the shadow, where Chuck didn't even attempt to contain it, instead warded the entirety of the universe. So then that way the shadow could not break into the universe and destroy it all and return everything to the nothingness they had come from. Chuck's world, after all, was one of narrative, and the key to controlling the chaos within it was control itself. He would carve a prison around the rogue elements, shutting them away in a place where their influence could never truly shatter the framework of his creation. But Jack was different. Chuck knew with some dread that to leave Jack alive, to allow him to continue growing, would mean the collapse of Chuck's control. It'd be the end of the story Chuck had written, and the beginning of one that Jack would write instead. And that's why Chuck, for the first time, chose to abandon his signature approach. No containment, no prison, just destruction. He didn't just steal Jack away, he killed him. Now, the question would be, why couldn't Chuck just write him out? Now, of course, let's be fair, you can just say, bad writing, but let's really examine this. Why didn't Chuck simply write Jack to be weaker, to stop growing, to lose? I think it's because he couldn't. At least, not in any way that mattered. Jack was too powerful for his abilities to be curbed in any natural way that would make a satisfying story to Chuck. Not only that, but Jack's biggest loss to date, losing most of his grace to Lucifer, had come back around to make him even more powerful. As if the natural order itself was working in Jack's favor. Even the empty was of no surefire way to end him. When angels and demons die, they go to the empty to sleep for all eternity with the shadow. It is the original void before Chuck, Amara, death had emerged, and supposedly impossible to escape. But by the time Chuck had finally come out to deal with Jack, the empty was shown not to be the ultimate solution in dealing with him. It had been breached numerous times, the angels being awakened and resurrected by Billy, the new dad. Chuck, heck, even the shadow itself had resurrected people. Essentially, Jack was the embodiment of Team Free Will's whole premise, something Chuck's universe had never truly seen: true free will. That's why Jack wasn't rewritten. That's why he wasn't just sealed away like Amara. He was a rival author in the making. Not only that, but Chuck lacked the power to permanently end Jack. This is due to their power sets. Chuck is creation, Amara is destruction, and only she could ensure Jack's erasure.
You know the rules. I can create, I can destroy, but I can't do a hard reset, reboot everything without you.
Throughout the history, fear has been the greatest way that a ruler falls. And just like in any ruler in any history, Chuck also found himself in that same situation. The fear became hatred because of the lack of control. And so in the end, Chuck really was the monster at the end of the story. And he created his own monster and became the very thing he was disappointed in. He became human. Hopefully he'll learn one day just how badly he messed up, but I doubt it. This secret dread, this hatred for Jack made no sense. But then again, fear is irrational. It never makes sense.